We are back here on the Lynne Hayes Freeland Show. Dr. Epryl King is our guest. We're talking critical race theory. So, Dr. King, let me ask you this. Why now? Why is this a conversation now? And why is time of the essence that people understand it and make their voices heard?
So why now? Because some people came out and decided that shouldn't be something that is taught, or at least the way they think, taught in schools. I don't know exactly who those people are, but it has since grown into such a mass that there are whole states who are now have already effectively banned this. Mm-hmm. So you've got the state of Texas, you have the state of Idaho. You have other states that have, I think there are about 23 states now that have either banned critical race theory altogether or have some are in somewhere in the process of legislation to ban it. Pennsylvania is now one of them. As of June, I believe, the bill was put on the table. It is now, in the process of being considered whether they are going to ban it or not. Well, this is Pennsylvania, and since I work in Pennsylvania, that impacts me, and that impacts anybody in the public schools and the public institutions.
So wait, so that I'm clear, so that you guys are clear, if this ban goes into effect, that would affect all of our public school systems across the state of Pennsylvania, and none of this theory could be incorporated in the educational system? Am I understanding that correctly?
So my understanding, when I look at some of the other states, Texas, for example, I remember seeing a graphic where they had certain words that were like how to find out if this is being taught in your child's classroom. Well, some of those words were diversity, and they considered that critical race theory. Some of those words were inclusion or anti-bias, and they house that all under critical race theory. Like I said, nobody's teaching the academic master's level course of critical race theory. But because it impacts and informs how we teach and what we know, people are being trained on it. So if people are being trained that there are some unconscious biases, for example, that could impact how I'm teaching or how we're teaching our kids in order to help us be more inclusive and make it an environment where all cultures are included. Notice I said all, not just one. Mm-hmm. Then it's turned into something that it can impact us because people have put it under that umbrella. So in a way, it informs what we do in education, not that we're teaching critical race theory, but that what we do is informed by that, as well as multicultural education and culturally responsive practices.
So I think that is one of them, as I'm listening to you describe it, I think that is a big misconception. I think that people have this image, this vision that critical race theory is a class that their 8-year-old is going to sit in and they're going to be told all these things. And it doesn't sound like it could be any further from the truth than that. It's not like your third grader, little Johnny, is not going to go to gym and then critical race theory class.
No. Can I give you some examples?
Please.
All right. In my own practice, an example of how it informs what I do is when I'm an elementary teacher, so I have a classroom library. I want to make sure that my classroom library represents the students that are in my classroom or in the school and so on. If I don't think race first, I could, especially if I'm a middle class mainstream teacher, I could end up with all books with white characters or the white middle class experience if I'm not careful. Critical race theory, and therefore culture responsive practices, teaches me that, well, you have to make sure that you meet all of your kids' needs. So alongside your Amelia Bedelia books and your Junie B. Jones books, you need to have other books that also address are representative of the students that are in your class. So if we don't want that for our kids, we're actually hurting them. It's not the other way around, that by some, reason, if you have white students that are in that classroom, that they're harmed. We're actually harming the kids that are not, white middle class mainstream by not having things in the curriculum for them to see that look like them.
And now that's one of the things that gets repeated, though. And I mentioned to you before we actually started recording the show, a comment that I saw on social media earlier, and a parent said, you know, well, if critical race theory comes into the classroom, my son, who's a white male, is going to be made to feel bad about himself. Again, that couldn't be further from the truth.
No, in fact, I think where some people even may be looking at, I gave you an example of inclusion of something, a very primary aspect, but there's also the inclusion of history, right? So, in a lot of times, you have text or stories or textbooks that may have a lot of history taught by the perspective, we say, of the winner, right? It's really history is told by the winner. So, if you look at who would not be a winner in this country, well, there were Native Americans who had complete genocide. The story is not being told by them, I promise. So if you don't include them and their perspectives on certain things that you do teach, such as Columbus Day, right, then we're hurting that student by leaving out their perspective. Likewise, when you teach about the Declaration of Independence, well, some students were left out of that, and history says they were left out of it, such as that we needed the Emancipation Proclamation to come in and say, okay, it's time to include this group too. Well, if we only teach about the Declaration of Independence separate from that, we are excluding those kids, and therefore only leaving what's left is the white middle class mainstream perspective of history. So if we're hurting anyone, we're hurting the people who are left out of that story. So we actually need to include them.
So I think the other thing that strikes me now that you and I are having this conversation, which, by the way, I'm so glad you came on the show today, is that this is this is not just an issue for people of color, for Black and brown people. And that's where I think people get this twisted as well. And I want to talk about that, and then what the community needs to do. And we'll do all of that next when the Lynne Hayes Freeland Show continues. So don't go away.